Rome makes another move, and once again the question returns. What is the true direction of this pontificate on the German question? Because this appointment cannot be read as a neutral personnel decision. It sits inside a pattern, and patterns are what reveal a will. Let's start with the bare facts. On July 7, 2026, the Vatican announced that Pope Leo XIV had named a new bishop for the Diocese of Eichstätt in Bavaria. The appointee is Auxiliary Bishop Christian Wurz of Freiburg im Breisgau, and Eichstätt has been viewed as a bellwether because the Pope has a free hand in appointing its bishop, unlike in German dioceses where the cathedral chapter makes the choice. Wurz is 55, was ordained a priest in 2006, and became an auxiliary bishop in 2019. He now becomes, by several accounts, the youngest diocesan bishop in Germany. He succeeds Bishop Gregor Maria Hanke, a Benedictine who resigned last year at 70 after leading Eichstätt for 2 decades. And here is where the story stops being a routine transition and starts being a signal. Because Hanke and Wurz did not simply have different personalities, the two bishops took opposing stances on controversial aspects of the German synodal way, the reform process that has occupied the German Church since 2019. Consider what that process actually proposed. In its final assembly, the synodal way approved blessings for same-sex unions, the normalization of laypeople preaching, and requests to re-examine the Church's stance on clerical celibacy and women's ordination. An earlier assembly had already endorsed the idea that women's ordination should be studied, that homosexual partnerships should receive public blessing, and that homosexual acts within such partnerships should not be classified as sinful. Now look at where Wurz stood on these very questions. He supported a synodal way resolution arguing that same-sex and remarried couples have often experienced exclusion within the Church, and that public blessings could serve as a gesture of recognition and reconciliation. He also supported the synodal way's call for a reassessment of Church teaching on homosexuality, a text that argued homosexual orientation should be evaluated the same way as heterosexual orientation, and that same-sex relationships should not be considered intrinsically evil. And on the question of women, Wurz supported the resolution on women's ordination, which invoked Ordinatio Sacerdotalis, the 1994 apostolic letter of John Paul II that reserved priestly ordination to men, and asked whether that teaching itself needed to be re-examined by the Pope and a council. Hanke, meanwhile, stood on the other side of nearly all of it. He was among the small number of German bishops who consistently pushed back against these resolutions during his tenure. So what has happened here is not simply a bishop retires, a bishop arrives. It is a diocese moving from the hands of one of the synodal way's quiet dissenters into the hands of one of its clear supporters, in the one German diocese where Rome itself, not a local chapter, makes that choice. This is why some observers have called it more than routine. One line of commentary put it plainly: personnel is policy, and this appointment follows others of the same type. Another observer went further, saying the appointment makes it less likely that the Vatican will actually stop the German synodal way, because if it wanted to, this was the moment to signal otherwise. And it didn't. And there is a detail that sharpens the contrast even more. This appointment came only days after the Vatican had confirmed excommunications tied to the Society of St. Pius X, following its unauthorized episcopal consecrations. So, within the same short stretch of time, Rome hands down its harshest canonical penalty against a group known for holding fast to the old liturgy and older doctrinal formulations. And Rome elevates to one of Germany's most closely watched sees, a bishop who has publicly backed the very resolutions most in tension with that same tradition. We should be fair here, because fairness matters even when the facts are uncomfortable. Appointing bishops is the Pope's prerogative, and it always has been. A man's votes at a synodal assembly 3 years ago do not automatically dictate how he will govern a diocese today. Wurtz, for his part, spoke in gentler and more pastoral terms after the appointment was announced, saying only that he hoped to use his experience and skills to help build the kingdom of God in Eichstätt and to walk with the people there. Nothing in those words is alarming on its own. Bishop Hanke himself, in stepping aside, offered a generous assessment of his successor as a spiritually experienced and theologically competent pastor. So it would be wrong to turn one appointment into a verdict on the whole pontificate. And yet it would also be naive to pretend the pattern isn't there. This is the second time in recent memory that a diocese long associated with resistance to the synodal way has passed into the hands of one of its supporters. And it comes at a moment when both Pope Francis before him and Pope Leo XIV have expressed concern about the marginalization of the section of the German episcopate that does not support the synodal path. If that marginalization is a real concern in Rome, this appointment does not obviously relieve it. If anything, for those already uneasy, it deepens the very worry Rome says it wants to address. That is the tension sitting underneath this whole story, and it is not going away quietly. On one side, a Vatican that keeps insisting, through documents and letters, that the German process cannot simply overwrite universal doctrine. On the other, a pattern of concrete appointments that keeps placing supporters of that very process into positions of real authority. Words in one direction, personnel in another. And a church watching both, left to ask which one actually describes where this is heading. Because here is the deeper question this appointment forces into the open. Is this simply the ordinary give and take of a large, diverse church, where a wide range of pastoral instincts are represented in its bishops, as they always have been? Or is it something else, a slow, appointment-by-appointment shift, in which the theological center of gravity in Germany moves, regardless of what the documents from Rome continue to say? There is no way to answer that from a single name in Bavaria. But there is also no way to pretend the question isn't being asked by people well beyond one blog or one commentator. It is being asked in seminaries, in parish halls, among Catholics in Germany who have watched this process for 7 years and are tired of being told to wait for clarity that never quite arrives. And that waiting has a cost, because uncertainty in the Church is not a neutral, harmless state. It is, itself, a kind of wound, a fog in which the faithful on every side start to wonder whether the ground under their feet is still where they thought it was. What do you think this appointment really signals? Tell me in the comments. I want to know where you stand on this. Let's pick up where we left off, because the appointment of Bishop Wurtz to Eichstätt is not really the end of the story. It's a lens. And through that lens, we can see the larger and more difficult question the German Church, and really the whole Church, has been circling for years. What happens when a local process keeps pushing in one direction, while Rome keeps insisting, in its official language, that nothing has actually changed? Let's widen the frame a little. This appointment did not happen in isolation. In February of this year, Bishop Heiner Wilmer of Hildesheim was elected president of the German Bishops' Conference, succeeding Bishop Georg Betzing, one of the main architects of the synodal path. Wilmer has himself been actively involved in that same process since it began in 2019. So the man now leading the German bishops, and the man now leading one of Germany's most closely watched dioceses, both come from within the synodal way's own ranks. That is not a coincidence of individual biographies. That is a changing of the guard. And remember what that process actually produced. By its final 2023 assembly, the synodal way had approved the blessing of same-sex unions, the normalization of lay preaching, and calls to re-examine celibacy and women's ordination. These aren't footnotes. These are proposals that touch the sacraments, the priesthood, and the moral teaching of the Church on marriage and sexuality, the very core of what makes Catholic doctrine Catholic, rather than simply one more Christian community organizing itself however a local majority prefers. Rome's response to all this has, on paper, been firm. Pope Francis himself warned in 2023 that significant segments of the German Church were taking steps that threatened to steer it away from the universal Church's common path. That is about as direct a warning as a pope gives, and Leo XIV has continued in that same vein of concern. So the official word from Rome, across 2 pontificates now, has been consistent. This cannot simply become its own separate track. But then look again at where the actual governing authority keeps landing. Not with the bishops who took Rome's warnings most seriously, with the bishops who voted for the resolutions Rome warned about. If the words say "stop" and the appointments say "continue," which one is the real message? A church, like any institution, ultimately communicates through both what it says and what it does. And when those 2 channels point in different directions, people don't split the difference. They start to trust the one that seems to carry consequences. And appointments carry consequences. Statements, however firm, can be read again next year and reinterpreted. A bishop governs a diocese for the rest of his working life. This is where the fairest and hardest question has to be asked plainly. Is Rome actually trying to hold a firm doctrinal line while allowing pastoral diversity in tone and pace, which is a legitimate, historic pattern in a church spread across very different cultures? Or is unity in diversity, in this particular case, becoming a quiet name for doctrinal drift, dressed up in a manner gentle enough that no one has to say the word "change" out loud? Both readings are available from the same set of facts, and that is precisely the problem. A pattern that can support 2 opposite interpretations at once is not clarity. It's ambiguity wearing the clothing of policy. And ambiguity, sustained over enough years and enough appointments, eventually functions the same way a decision would, because people on the ground stop waiting for Rome to clarify and simply start acting as though the drift is the new normal. There's a reason this particular appointment landed the way it did among conservative-leaning commentators, some of whom described it in far harsher terms than I'd use here, framing it as an outright endorsement of the synodal way. I won't adopt that language. It's too final, too certain about intentions that no single appointment can actually prove. But the anger behind it comes from a real place, from Catholics who took Rome's own repeated warnings seriously, and who now watch the men who ignored those warnings receive the mitres. And there's an equally real place the opposite anger comes from, Catholics in Germany who have spent years being told that reform, listening, and pastoral sensitivity to the excluded are exactly what this pontificate wants, only to watch every step forward get followed by another Roman letter urging caution. Both groups, in their own way, feel like they're being told one thing and shown another. So where does that leave someone trying to be faithful in the middle of all this, without pretending the tension away and without turning it into a verdict of betrayal either? I think it leaves us back at the same principle that has held the Church together through every other period of confusion. Judge the substance, not just the personnel. A bishop's synodal vote in 2023 tells you where he stood then. It does not by itself tell you how he will teach and govern a diocese starting now. Bishop Wirtz will be judged fairly by what he actually does in Eichstätt, whether he holds the deposit of faith even while extending genuine pastoral care, or whether he treats his new see as a platform to finish what the synodal way started. That's a story still being written, not one already concluded by a single appointment. What is already concluded, though, is this: the confusion itself is a real cost, regardless of how Wirtz governs. A church that speaks with 2 voices, one in its documents, another in its appointments, asks its people to hold 2 contradictory signals at once, indefinitely. That is a heavier burden than most people outside these debates realize, and it falls hardest on ordinary Catholics trying to raise their children in the faith without knowing which German diocese next year will look nothing like the one before it. So I'll leave you with the same question this story keeps circling back to, because I think it's the one worth sitting with rather than answering too quickly. Can a church actually hold unity around Christ and his teaching, while its governing appointments keep tilting toward those most eager to revise that teaching? Or does unity, sooner or later, require Rome's actions to match its own words? What do you think this appointment really means for where the German church and the wider church is heading? Leave it in the comments. I read every one. Let's return to that appointment in Eichstätt, because it's really a lens onto something larger. What happens when a local process keeps pushing one direction, while Rome's official language keeps insisting nothing has changed? This didn't happen in isolation. In February, Bishop Heiner Wilmer of Hildesheim was elected president of the German Bishops' Conference, succeeding Bishop Georg Betzing, one of the main architects of the Synodal Way. Wilmer has himself been active in that process since 2019. So the man now leading Germany's bishops and the man now leading one of its most closely watched dioceses both come from within the Synodal Way's own ranks. That isn't coincidence. That's a changing of the guard. Remember what that process actually produced. By its final 2023 assembly, the Synodal Way had approved blessings for same-sex unions, the normalization of lay preaching, and calls to re-examine celibacy and women's ordination. These touch the sacraments, the priesthood, and the Church's moral teaching itself, not footnotes, but the core of what makes Catholic doctrine Catholic, rather than one more community organizing around a local majority. Rome's response, on paper, has been firm. Pope Francis warned in 2023 that significant parts of the German Church risked steering away from the Universal Church's common path. Leo XIV has voiced the same concern. So the official word, across two pontificates, is consistent. This cannot become its own separate track. But look again at where actual governing authority keeps landing, not with the bishops who took those warnings seriously, but with bishops who voted for the resolutions Rome warned about. If the words say, "hold the line," and the appointments say, "continue," which message actually lands? Institutions communicate through both what they say and what they do, and when those point in different directions, people trust the one with consequences. Statements can be reread and softened later. A bishop governs a diocese for the rest of his working life. So the fair, hard question: is Rome trying to hold a firm doctrinal line while allowing legitimate pastoral diversity in tone and pace, a genuinely old pattern in a church spread across many cultures? Or is unity in diversity here becoming a gentle name for doctrinal drift, dressed carefully enough that no one has to say "change" out loud? Both readings fit the same facts, and that's the real problem. A pattern that supports two opposite interpretations isn't clarity. It's ambiguity wearing the clothing of policy. And sustained ambiguity eventually functions like a decision, because people on the ground stop waiting for Rome to clarify and start treating the drift as normal. This is why some commentators reacted to this appointment in far harsher terms than I'd use, calling it an outright endorsement of the Synodal Way. I won't go that far. It's too certain about intentions no single appointment can prove. But the frustration comes from somewhere real. Catholics who took Rome's own warnings seriously, now watching the men who didn't receive the mitres. And there's an equally real frustration on the other side. German Catholics told for years that reform and pastoral sensitivity were exactly what this pontificate wanted, only to see every step forward met by another cautionary letter from Rome. Both sides feel told one thing and shown another. So where does that leave someone trying to stay faithful in the middle, without pretending the tension away or rushing to call it betrayal? I think it comes back to an old principle: judge substance, not just personnel. A synodal vote in 2023 tells you where a bishop stood then, not how he'll govern a diocese now. Wirtz will be judged fairly by what he actually does in Eichstätt. What's already certain, though, is the cost of the confusion itself, regardless of how he governs. A church speaking with two voices, one in its documents, another in its appointments, asks ordinary Catholics to hold two contradictory signals indefinitely. That's a heavy thing to carry. So here's the question worth sitting with. Can unity around Christ's teaching survive if governing appointments keep tilting toward those most eager to revise it? Or does unity eventually require Rome's actions to match its words? What do you think this appointment really means? Leave it in the comments. I read every one.